In the quiet little neighborhood of Maplewood Heights, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with perfectly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and houses painted in soft pastel shades. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, or at least pretended to, and where weekends were spent sipping lemonade on porches or chatting over fences. Everything seemed picture perfect, almost like something out of a magazine. But beneath this surface of calm and order, there was one woman who kept things running like clockwork. Margaret Karen Thompson. Margaret wasn't just any resident. She was the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a role she took very seriously. She carried her clipboard everywhere, wearing it like a badge of honor. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, not even the tiniest weed poking through someone's sidewalk cracks. To Margaret, rules weren't suggestions, they were laws etched in stone. And if you dared to break them, well, let's just say you'd hear about it sooner rather than later. Her reputation preceded her. Neighbors whispered about how she once fined a family for leaving their Christmas lights up until mid-January. Another time, she sent a strongly worded letter to a homeowner whose mailbox didn't match the HOA-approved design. No detail was too small for Margaret's scrutiny. Some people admired her dedication to keeping the neighborhood pristine, while others found her relentless enforcement exhausting. Still, no one could deny that under her watchful eye, Maplewood Heights remained as neat and polished as ever. But all of that changed when Harold Jenkins decided to build a veterans memorial in his front yard. Harold was a retired Navy veteran who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. He wasn't flashy or loud. He kept to himself most of the time, spending his days tending to his garden or reading on his porch. But behind his quiet demeanor lay a heart heavy with grief. Harold's only son, Michael, had been a soldier who made the ultimate sacrifice during a deployment overseas. Losing him left a void in Harold's life that nothing could fill. One day, Harold came up with an idea. What if he created a small space in his yard where he could honor Michael's memory? It wouldn't be anything extravagant, just a modest tribute to remind him of the boy who used to ride bikes down these same streets. So, he got to work. He planted a few potted flowers, placed a weathered American flag on a stand, and added a plaque engraved with Michael's name and rank. For Harold, it was more than just decoration. It was a sacred corner of his home, a place where he could feel close to his son again. At first, no one paid much attention to the memorial. After all, it blended in nicely with Harold's otherwise tidy yard. But Margaret noticed almost immediately. One morning, as she walked her dog past Harold's house, her gaze landed on the display, her brow furrowed as she studied it from every angle. By the time she reached home, she had already drafted a formal letter to Harold, citing several violations of the HOA's landscaping guidelines. "You can't do this," she muttered to herself as she typed the letter. "It's against the rules." The next day, Harold found the envelope tucked into his mailbox. His hands trembled as he opened it and read the contents. According to Margaret, the memorial constituted an unapproved personal display that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. She gave him exactly 72 hours to remove it, or face consequences. Harold stared at the letter in disbelief. How could something so meaningful to him be considered a violation? It wasn't noisy, obtrusive, or unsafe. All it did was honor the memory of a hero. As the days passed, Harold struggled to process what was happening. He couldn't imagine taking down the memorial. It felt like erasing a part of Michael all over again. Yet he also knew that defying the HOA would only make matters worse. Margaret had a way of making life difficult for those who crossed her. Frustrated and heartbroken, Harold decided to appeal directly to the HOA board. Surely, they would understand, once they heard his story. When the meeting finally arrived, Harold stood before the board members clutching the plaque with Michael's name. His voice wavered as he explained why the memorial meant so much to him. He talked about Michael's love for the military, his bravery, and the hole his death had left in their family. Tears filled his eyes as he pleaded with the board to let him keep the memorial. "It's not hurting anyone," he said softly. All I want is to remember my son." For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Margaret spoke up, her tone icy and unyielding. "I'm sorry, Harold," she said, barely glancing at him. "Rules are rules. We can't make exceptions for anyone." Her words cut deeper than any fine ever could. Harold left the meeting feeling defeated, unsure of what to do next. Little did he know, help was closer than he thought, and it would come in the form of someone who understood sacrifice better than anyone else. Back at home, Harold sat on his porch, staring at the memorial as the sun dipped below the horizon. The flags fluttered gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the yard. Despite everything, he refused to give up. This memorial wasn't just for him. It was for Michael, for every soldier who never came home, and for the values they fought to protect. If Margaret wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But Harold had no idea that the battle lines were about to shift in ways he never expected. Harold Jenkins sat alone on his porch that evening, the weight of the HOA's decision pressing heavily on his shoulders. The sun had set, leaving behind a soft orange glow in the sky, but Harold barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the small memorial in his front yard, the weathered American flag fluttering gently in the breeze, the plaque bearing his son Michael's name, and the potted flowers he'd carefully chosen to symbolize hope and remembrance. It was more than just an arrangement of objects. It was a piece of his heart, a tangible connection to the boy who had once filled his home with laughter. The HOA's letter still burned in his mind. Margaret's words, cold, clinical, and devoid of empathy, echoed in his thoughts. "Rules. Our rules," she had said, as if those 3 words could erase the pain of losing a child or diminish the importance of honoring someone who gave their life for their country. Harold clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. How could anyone fail to see what this memorial meant? To him, it wasn't some random decoration cluttering up the neighborhood. It was sacred ground, a place where memories lived, where love endured, and where sacrifice was remembered. But anger wasn't the only emotion Harold felt. There was also sadness, a deep, aching sorrow that came from being misunderstood. He had hoped that when he explained his reasons to the HOA board, they would understand. He thought telling them about Michael, about the years spent raising him, about the pride he felt watching his son graduate from boot camp, would make them reconsider. Instead, Margaret dismissed his story with a wave of her hand, reducing his grief to nothing more than a violation of landscaping guidelines. Her indifference stung worse than any fine ever could. As the days passed, Harold found himself avoiding conversations with neighbors. He didn't want to hear their opinions or justify his actions to anyone else. Some people stopped by to offer kind words, but others whispered behind his back, speculating whether he should comply with the HOA's demands. A few even suggested compromises, maybe move the memorial to the backyard or replace the flag with something less conspicuous. But Harold knew those weren't real solutions. Moving the memorial would feel like hiding it, and that was something he refused to do. This wasn't just about following rules. It was about standing up for what mattered most to him. Word of the conflict spread quickly through Maplewood Heights. Like ripples in a pond, the news reached every corner of the neighborhood. Opinions divided sharply. On one side were those who supported Harold wholeheartedly. They admired his courage and understood the depth of his loss. Many of these neighbors began showing subtle signs of solidarity. One morning, Harold woke up to find tiny American flags planted along the edges of his lawn. Another day, a neighbor left a note taped to his mailbox that read, "Your son is a hero. Thank you for reminding us what true patriotism looks like." These small gestures brought tears to Harold's eyes and gave him strength to keep fighting. On the other side were Margaret's supporters, people who believed that rules existed for a reason and that exceptions would lead to chaos. They argued that personal displays like Harold's disrupted the uniformity of the neighborhood, potentially lowering property values. Margaret herself doubled down on her stance, posting flyers around the community that framed the issue as one of fairness and order. "We must all follow the same guidelines," one flyer read. Personal displays harm everyone by creating inconsistency and division. Her tone was firm, but her message lacked compassion. To her, this was a matter of principle, not humanity. Despite the growing tension, Harold remained steadfast. Each morning he watered the flowers at the memorial and straightened the flagpole. He wanted the display to look perfect, not because he cared what Margaret thought, but because it deserved respect. Every time he looked at it, he saw Michael's face, young, smiling, full of dreams. The thought of dismantling it was unbearable. It wasn't just a tribute to his son. It was a reminder of everything Michael stood for: courage, duty, and selflessness. Taking it down would feel like betraying him all over again. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her campaign against the memorial. She called special meetings of the HOA board, insisting they take immediate action if Harold refused to comply. She circulated petitions urging stricter enforcement of the rules and even threatened legal action if necessary. Her determination bordered on obsession, and some neighbors began to grow uneasy. Was this really worth all the drama? Did enforcing a rule about landscaping outweigh the value of honoring a fallen soldier? For Harold, the pressure mounted with each passing day. The deadline loomed closer, and he still hadn't decided what to do. Should he remove the memorial to avoid further conflict? Or should he stand his ground, even if it meant facing fines? Or worse. Late at night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the same questions in his head. He imagined Michael sitting beside him, offering advice. "Dad," he might say, "you've always taught me to do the right thing, no matter how hard it is." Thinking of his son gave Harold clarity. No matter what happened, he couldn't back down. This fight wasn't just for him. It was for Michael, for every veteran who served their country, and for the ideals they defended. Unbeknownst to Harold, his quiet resistance was about to attract unexpected attention. Far away from Maplewood Heights, news of the dispute reached someone who couldn't ignore it. A man whose own life had been shaped by service and sacrifice. This person knew firsthand the importance of remembering those who gave everything for their country. And when he heard about Harold's struggle, he decided to step in, not just to support a grieving father, but to remind the world of the true meaning of honor and respect. Though Harold didn't know it yet, help was on the way. But until then, he held on to his faith, drawing strength from the memorial and the memories it represented. As the final hours before the deadline ticked away, he resolved to face whatever came next with dignity and courage. After all, he wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for something far greater. As the days leading up to the deadline grew shorter, the tension in Maplewood Heights reached a boiling point. Neighbors who had once greeted each other with polite smiles now exchanged uneasy glances across their driveways. Conversations at the local coffee shop and grocery store revolved around one topic: Harold Jenkins and his Veterans Memorial. Opinions were as divided as ever, with some people rallying behind Harold and others siding firmly with Margaret Thompson and her strict interpretation of the HOA rules. On Harold's side were those who saw the memorial not as a violation, but as a testament to love, sacrifice, and patriotism. Many of these supporters were older residents, people who remembered what it was like to live through wars or send loved ones off to fight them. For them, the sight of an American flag fluttering in someone's yard wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of gratitude and remembrance. They admired Harold's quiet determination and felt a deep sense of solidarity with him. Some even went out of their way to show their support in small but meaningful ways. One morning, Harold woke up to find that someone had placed a bouquet of fresh red, white, and blue flowers near the base of the memorial. Attached was a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for keeping Michael's memory alive. We're with you." Another neighbor left a small wooden bench beside the display, inviting passers-by to pause and reflect. Even children got involved, drawing pictures of soldiers and flags and taping them to Harold's mailbox. These acts of kindness touched Harold deeply, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. But not everyone shared this sentiment. Margaret's supporters argued that personal displays like Harold's disrupted the neighborhood's carefully curated appearance. To them, The HOA's rules weren't just arbitrary guidelines. They were essential for maintaining property values and ensuring uniformity. They believed exceptions would set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for others to ignore the rules whenever it suited them. Margaret herself became increasingly vocal, using every opportunity to reinforce her stance. She began hosting informal gatherings at her home, inviting like-minded neighbors to discuss the issue over lemonade and cookies. During these meetings, she portrayed herself as the voice of reason, framing the conflict as a battle between order and chaos. "If we let Harold keep his memorial," she said during one such gathering, "what's next? Will someone install a fountain in their front yard? Or put up neon signs advertising their business?" Her arguments resonated with some, especially newer residents who valued the pristine aesthetic of Maplewood Heights above all else. To further sway public opinion, Margaret distributed flyers throughout the neighborhood. Printed in bold letters, they emphasized the importance of following HOA guidelines and warned of the potential consequences of allowing personal displays. "Our community thrives on consistency," one flyer declared. "Let's work together to protect our shared standards." While her tone remained professional, there was an undercurrent of frustration in her words, a thinly veiled accusation that Harold was selfishly prioritizing his own needs over the greater good. Despite Margaret's efforts, cracks began to form in her support base. A few neighbors who initially agreed with her started to question whether enforcing the rules in this case was truly justified. One woman, a retired teacher named Linda, voiced her concerns during a casual chat with friends. "I understand why we have rules," she said thoughtfully. "But does removing a memorial really make our neighborhood better? Doesn't it say something about us if we can't find room for compassion?" Others echoed similar sentiments. A young father admitted that seeing the tiny American flags planted along Harold's lawn made him think twice about where his loyalty lay. "My grandfather served in Vietnam," he explained. "I can't imagine telling him he couldn't honor his buddies because of some rule about landscaping. Maybe we need to rethink this." Even Margaret's closest allies began to waver. Her husband, Tom, usually supportive of her endeavors, expressed doubts during dinner one evening. "Do you really think this is worth all the trouble?" he asked, cautiously. "It's just a little flag and some flowers. Can't we let it slide this time?" His comment earned him a sharp glare from Margaret, who dismissed his concerns with a curt reply. "If I start making exceptions, where does it end?" Amidst the growing divide, Harold continued to tend to the memorial each day. He watered the flowers, polished the plaque, and adjusted the flag so it stood straight and proud. Though the stress weighed heavily on him, he refused to give in. Every act of support from his neighbors gave him renewed strength, while every flyer or critical remark from Margaret only hardened his resolve. He knew the final decision rested with the HOA board, but until then he focused on what mattered most, honoring Michael's memory. The night before the deadline arrived, the atmosphere in Maplewood Heights was electric with anticipation. Neighbors gathered in groups debating passionately about what should happen next. Some speculated that Harold might cave under pressure and remove the memorial after all. Others predicted that Margaret would double down, possibly escalating the situation further. No one could agree on what the outcome would be, but everyone knew something big was coming. Unbeknownst to anyone, including Harold, events were about to take an unexpected turn. Far beyond the confines of Maplewood Heights, news of the dispute had traveled farther than anyone realized. Someone influential, a person whose very presence commanded respect, had taken notice. This individual understood the complexities of sacrifice and duty better than most, and they decided it was time to step in. Their arrival would change everything, turning what had been a local squabble into something far more significant. For now, though, Harold remained unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. As he sat on his porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The memorial stood silently before him, bathed in the golden light of dusk. It was more than just a tribute to Michael. It was a beacon of hope. a reminder that even in the face of adversity, love and courage could shine through. Whatever happened next, Harold vowed to stand firm, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in the power of remembrance. The morning of the deadline dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed almost too perfect for the turmoil brewing in Maplewood Heights. Birds chirped cheerfully from tree branches, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the air. Yet, despite the serene surroundings, tension hung heavy over the neighborhood. Everyone knew today was the day. Harold Jenkins either had to remove the Veterans Memorial or face the consequences imposed by Margaret Thompson and the HOA. Harold woke early, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He'd spent the previous night pacing his living room, replaying every possible scenario in his head. What if the HOA sent someone to forcibly dismantle the memorial? Would they fine him into financial ruin? Or worse, take legal action against him? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but deep down, he remained resolute. No matter what happened, he wouldn't back down. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about standing up for something far greater than himself. As Harold stepped outside to check on the memorial one last time, he noticed something unusual. A sleek black SUV was parked along the curb near his driveway. It looked out of place among the minivans and sedans that typically lined the streets of Maplewood Heights. Curious, Harold squinted at the vehicle, trying to make out who might be inside. Before he could think much of it, the driver's door opened, and a tall man emerged. The stranger exuded an aura of authority and confidence. His posture was straight, his movements deliberate, and his piercing gaze surveyed the scene with precision. Dressed in casual yet polished attire, a navy blazer, khakis, and polished shoes, he didn't look like any of the usual visitors to the neighborhood. There was something unmistakably commanding about him, as though he were used to being listened to without question. Harold watched as the man approached, unsure of what to expect. When the stranger extended his hand, Harold hesitated for only a moment before shaking it. The grip was firm, reassuring even. "Mr. Jenkins?" the man asked, his voice calm but resonant. "My name is General Thomas Reed. I'm here because I heard about your situation." For a moment, Harold was speechless. He stared at the man, taking in his distinguished appearance and the weight of his words. "General Reed?" Harold finally managed to say, his voice tinged with disbelief. You're here about my memorial?" The general nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "That's right," he said. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries. Let's just say I have a vested interest in stories like yours, and I believe you deserve support." Harold felt a surge of gratitude mixed with bewilderment. How had this man, a retired four-star Army general, found out about his plight? And why would someone of such stature care enough to show up unannounced? Sensing Harold's confusion, General Reed offered a brief explanation. "A mutual friend forwarded me an article about the dispute," he explained. "When I read about how the HOA was pressuring you to remove a tribute to your son, I knew I had to get involved. We can't let bureaucracy overshadow honor." Hearing those words, "We can't let bureaucracy overshadow honor," sent a shiver down Harold's spine. For days he'd felt isolated, as though no one truly understood the significance of the memorial. But now, standing before him was someone who not only understood but also shared his values. General Reed's presence felt like a lifeline, a reminder that there were still people in the world willing to fight for what was right. Over the next hour, the two men sat together on Harold's porch, discussing the situation in detail. Harold recounted everything: the HOA's letter, the board meeting, Margaret's unwavering stance, and the growing divide within the community. As he spoke, General Reed listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. When Harold finished, the general leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but determined. "This isn't just about your memorial," General Reed said firmly. "It's about setting a precedent. If we allow them to dictate how we honor our fallen heroes, where does it stop? Respect for sacrifice shouldn't come second to landscaping guidelines." Harold nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. With General Reed by his side, he began to see a glimmer of hope. Together they devised a plan. First, the general would attend the upcoming HOA meeting scheduled for later that afternoon. He intended to address the board directly, using his experience and influence to advocate on Harold's behalf. Second, they would rally additional support from the community, encouraging neighbors to speak up during the meeting. Finally, if necessary, General Reed promised to explore other avenues, including media coverage, to bring attention to the injustice. Word of the general's arrival spread quickly through the neighborhood. By mid-morning, groups of curious residents gathered outside Harold's house, eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary figure who had come to defend the memorial. Some brought cameras, snapping photos as General Reed walked around the yard, inspecting the display. Others simply stood quietly, watching in awe as the man whose career had been defined by leadership and service lent his strength to a grieving father's cause. Margaret, however, was less impressed. When she heard about General Reed's involvement, her reaction was swift and defensive. She marched over to Harold's house, clipboard in hand, her face flushed with indignation. "This changes nothing," she declared, addressing both Harold and the general. "The rules are clear and exceptions cannot be made, not even for someone of your stature." General Reed turned to face her, his demeanor calm but imposing. "Mrs. Thompson," he said evenly, "I understand the importance of maintaining order, but sometimes rules must bend to accommodate humanity. Surely you can see that this memorial is more than just a personal display. It's a tribute to a soldier who gave his life for our freedom." Margaret faltered for a moment, clearly unsettled by the general's commanding presence. Still, she refused to back down. "I'll hear you out at the meeting," she said stiffly, "but don't expect me to change my position." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving behind a trail of muttered complaints. As the hours ticked closer to the meeting, excitement and anticipation rippled through Maplewood Heights. Neighbors whispered excitedly about what might happen next. Would General Reed's intervention sway the HOA board? Could Harold's memorial finally be spared? No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain. The quiet suburb was about to witness a showdown unlike anything it had seen before. For Harold, the wait was agonizing. Yet, having General Reed by his side gave him courage. For the first time, since the conflict began, he allowed himself to imagine a positive outcome. Maybe, just maybe, the memorial would stay, and with it, the memory of Michael would continue to shine brightly for all to see. Whatever happened next, Harold knew he wouldn't face it alone. By the time the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, the Maplewood Heights Community Center was packed to capacity. What was usually a quiet space reserved for book clubs and holiday potlucks had transformed into a buzzing arena of emotion and anticipation. Neighbors filed in one by one, some clutching cups of coffee, others whispering nervously among themselves. The air was thick with tension, curiosity, and an undercurrent of excitement. Everyone knew this meeting would be unlike any other. At the front of the room sat the HOA board members, their faces a mix of apprehension and determination. Margaret Thompson occupied the center seat, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. She looked around the crowded room, her sharp eyes scanning for signs of dissent or defiance. Beside her, other board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly aware that today's proceedings carried weight far beyond mundane discussions about fence heights and mailbox colors. Harold Jenkins arrived shortly after, flanked by General Thomas Reed. Their entrance caused a stir in the room. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and several people stood up to greet them. Harold, though visibly nervous, walked with a newfound confidence bolstered by the general's presence. General Reed, on the other hand, moved with the poise of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His tall frame and authoritative demeanor seemed to fill the room, silencing even the most vocal critics as he took his seat at the table alongside Harold. As the meeting began, Margaret called the room to order, her voice firm but tinged with unease. "Thank you all for coming," she said, attempting to project authority. Today we are here to address the ongoing issue regarding Mr. Jenkins's so-called memorial display and its compliance with HOA guidelines. Her tone was clipped, almost dismissive, as if trying to downplay the significance of what they were discussing. Before anyone else could speak, General Reed leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His calm yet commanding voice cut through the room like a knife. "If I may, Mrs. Thompson," he began, his words deliberate and measured. "I'd like to clarify that this is not merely a so-called memorial. It is a tribute, a sacred space dedicated to honoring a fallen soldier who gave his life for our country." The room fell silent. All eyes were on the general now, hanging onto his every word. He continued, his voice rising slightly as he spoke with conviction. "This isn't just about rules or aesthetics. This is about respect for those who serve, for the families left behind, and for the values that define us as a nation. To reduce such a meaningful act of remembrance to a mere landscaping violation is disrespectful, to say the least." Margaret bristled at his words, her face flushing red. "With all due respect, General," she interjected sharply, "rules exist for a reason. We cannot make exceptions based on personal feelings. If we allow this, where does it end? Will everyone start putting up memorials, statues, or displays in their yards? How will we maintain consistency?" General Reed didn't flinch. Instead, he fixed Margaret with a steady gaze, his expression unyielding. "Mrs. Thompson," he replied, his tone firm but respectful, "you're missing the point entirely. This isn't about opening the floodgates for random displays. This is about recognizing the unique sacrifice made by individuals like Michael Jenkins and ensuring that their memory is honored appropriately. Are you suggesting that honoring a hero undermines the fabric of this community?" His question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find a rebuttal. Sensing her hesitation, another board member chimed in nervously. "We understand your perspective, General, but we also have a responsibility to uphold the standards set forth by the HOA. Property values matter too." This sparked murmurs of agreement from some corners of the room, but General Reed wasn't finished. "Property values are important, yes," he acknowledged, nodding slightly. "But tell me this, does a small memorial truly threaten the value of these homes, or does it enhance them by showcasing the character and compassion of the people who live here? Communities aren't built on uniformity alone, they thrive on empathy, understanding, and shared values. That's what makes a neighborhood worth living in." His words resonated deeply with many in the audience. Several neighbors nodded in agreement while others scribbled notes furiously, eager to contribute once the floor opened for comments. One woman raised her hand tentatively, waiting to be called upon. When given the chance to speak, she stood up, her voice trembling but sincere. "I've lived here for 20 years, she said, "and I never realized how much we prioritize rules over relationships until now. Seeing Harold's memorial reminds me of my own father who served in Korea. I think we need to reconsider what kind of message we're sending, not just to Harold, but to everyone who calls this place home." Her statement drew applause from parts of the crowd, prompting Margaret to pound her gavel impatiently. "Order, please," she snapped, though her usual authority seemed diminished in the face of growing opposition. Another neighbor stood up, this time a younger man holding a toddler in his arms. "My son loves looking at the flags in Harold's yard," he said. "It gives me a chance to teach him about bravery and sacrifice. Isn't that more valuable than worrying about whether something matches the color scheme?" Each testimonial chipped away at Margaret's argument, exposing the cracks in her rigid stance. Even some of her staunchest supporters began to waver, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the tide of public opinion turned against her. For every person who defended the importance of rules, two more spoke passionately about the need for compassion and flexibility. Throughout the exchange, Harold sat quietly, listening intently to the voices rising in his defense. Tears welled in his eyes as he heard neighbors share stories of loved ones who had served, echoing his own grief and gratitude. He glanced at General Reed, whose steady presence anchored the room, guiding the conversation with wisdom and tact. Every time Margaret tried to steer the discussion back to regulations and enforcement, the general skillfully redirected it toward the human element, the heart of the matter. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of heated debate, Margaret attempted one last stand. "I understand the emotional appeal here," she said, her voice strained. "But emotions shouldn't override logic. If we start bending the rules for one person, we risk losing control altogether." General Reed leaned back in his chair, folding his hands thoughtfully. "Control isn't leadership, Mrs. Thompson," he countered gently. "True leadership means finding balance between rules and humanity, between structure and compassion. Sometimes doing the right thing requires stepping outside the lines, and sometimes standing up for what matters most inspires others to do the same." The room erupted into applause, drowning out whatever retort Margaret might have had. Board members exchanged hesitant glances, realizing the writing was on the wall. One by one, they began nodding in agreement, signaling their willingness to reconsider. Margaret, defeated and visibly shaken, gathered her papers and muttered something about needing fresh air before storming out of the room. When the vote was finally called, the decision was unanimous. The memorial would stay. Cheers broke out across the room as neighbors embraced one another, celebrating not just the outcome but the unity it represented. For Harold, the moment was overwhelming. As he stood to thank everyone, his voice cracked with emotion. "This isn't just my victory," he said, choking back tears. "It's ours. Thank you for reminding me and Michael that love and courage still mean something in this world." General Reed placed a reassuring hand on Harold's shoulder, offering a rare smile. "Today proves that when we stand together we can achieve incredible things," he said. "Never forget that." As the meeting adjourned, neighbors lingered, reluctant to let the moment pass. Conversations flowed freely now, laughter replacing tension, connection replacing division. In the corner of the room, someone suggested organizing a ceremony to rededicate the memorial, inviting veterans and Gold Star families to join. The idea was met with enthusiastic approval, solidifying the sense that Maplewood Heights had taken a step toward becoming something greater than it was before. For Harold, the battle may have been won, but the journey was far from over. With the support of his neighbors and the unforgettable intervention of a retired 4-star general, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.